Welcome to the Closed-Minded Podcast, where we read with an open mind in order to close it again on something solid. Today, I get to announce a very exciting project I've been working on in secret for the last few months. I had the immense privilege to compile and edit a new book all about Bitcoin, co-written by tech CEO and investor Michael Saylor and the prolific podcaster and intellectual Robert Breedlove. It's now available on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and hardcover editions. Today's episode is my recent appearance on the Reformed Financial Advisor podcast. In it, we discuss how the book came about, including the entrepreneurial drive it took to propose it and to pursue it to completion. And we also do a dive into the content of the book. Here are some of the things that you'll learn in What is Money, the Saylor series. How Bitcoin encourages peaceful dispute resolution at all levels of society, personal, economic, and even between nation states. How Bitcoin erodes the ability of governments to manipulate our money, fund illegal wars, and bestow financial benefits on the politically favored. How Bitcoin adoption creates a rising tide for the poor and middle classes of the world. How integrating Bitcoin into social media platforms would effectively eliminate spam, bots, and the flotsam and jetsam of internet comment culture. And finally, how Bitcoin can monetize a volcano. Yes, that's an odd one, but it gets pretty interesting. I also have a special announcement at the end of this interview. If you've never bought Bitcoin before, or if you want to do so in a way that actually protects your privacy and your anonymity, then I have an incredible solution for you. So make sure to listen all the way to the end. All the links from this episode will be on the show notes page at closemindedpodcast.com/19. And with that, here is me being interviewed on the Reformed Financial Advisor podcast.
Seth Simmons, welcome to the Reformed Financial Advisor podcast. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, Seth, let me just do a brief intro here of you and who you are. So you're the editor of the new book, What is Money, the Saylor series, which when I heard about this from our mutual friend, I was immediately fascinated by the concept because we've had Eric Jorgensen here on the podcast. So Eric, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He did the Naval book. So what he did is he took the Naval Ravikant and he took his best tweets and turned it into a book, and it was sort of a massive success. And I also was reminded was the Peter Thiel book, right, from like 10 or 15 years ago, where I think somebody repurposed his lectures and turned it into like a super famous book. So I'm sort of intrigued by this concept of repurposing content into another medium. So good on you. I'm excited to learn more about this venture here.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to be involved with. And I actually went back and listened to your episode about the Naval book because I'm a fan of his. And I thought that was a pretty cool story where the guy that compiled everything together. It's pretty creative and entrepreneurial.
Well, good. So I guess first and foremost, maybe tell us as much as you want to share, what is your background and how did you come across this project of essentially turning this popular podcast series with Breedlove and Michael Saylor into a book?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically I am a layman who works in an industry completely unrelated, to finance or crypto or publishing, anything like that. I was just a listener to the show. And to anybody who's not aware, basically Robert Breedlove is this podcaster. He got this What is Money show where he has long form discussions with a variety of people about topics that sometimes only tangentially are related to Bitcoin, but there's that common thread that runs through everything. So it's about money and finance and politics and government, education, history, anything that you can connect back to those topics of money and economics and the fiat system and all of that. He gets about 1 million downloads a month, so he's pretty popular, and he takes these long form discussions and breaks them apart into multiple episodes that he calls series based upon the name of the person that he's discussing with. So the longest and the most famous series that he had on his show was with Michael Saylor, who's a well-known investor and tech CEO and Bitcoin evangelist, you could say. And so they have this really long, 17 episode discussion. It's probably 18 hours of just Saylor talking. And if you add in, the summarizing that Breedlove does at the end of most of the episodes, it's about 27 hours total. So it's a lot of content. And I ran across it just through my interest in Bitcoin and was listening, to it as I drove around. And I was just continually impressed by the quality of the content and just the depth of the thinking that Saylor was bringing in. He was bringing history and anthropology and politics and just all of these things he was weaving together into this really interesting discussion of Bitcoin and how it fits into finance and world history and all of these things. And I lost track of how many times I was thinking, man, I wish I could write that down, or I need to go back and listen to that again, or I need to get this in a way that I can, review it and sort of better digest it and consume it and really learn from it and internalize it. And so it occurred to me, man, this really needs to be an ebook. Like, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I also like to read. And, there's a lot of people that they don't learn as well listening. They would much rather have something to read or have something in front of them to, annotate on the page or highlight or make comments or whatever, flip through again. And so really, I as a nobody, I reached out cold to Robert Breedlove and just said, hey, have you ever considered turning the Saylor series into an ebook? And if so, I'd really like to help you do that. And just basically offered my services to him in that space. Didn't hear anything back for a few months. And I thought, well, he's not interested, or it disappeared in the mail or whatever. And a couple months later, he replied back and he said, hey, this did get lost, but I'm interested. Let's talk about this a little bit more. Can you send me a commercial proposal? And so I had to figure out how to write that up, because I'm not really in the business world in that sense either. So I figured out how to do that and wrote him up a description of what I was thinking we would do, what I would do, what I would expect from him, which mostly involved, marketing it. Like, if we're going to try to publish this thing, I want to make sure that he's going to post about it on social media and all of that. And he agreed to it, and we came up with an arrangement, and I just started to put it all together. So basically what the book is a glorified transcript of this 17 episode podcast series. And I just took the content, the transcript of it, and started to organize it into book form. And so, there's a lot of mechanics involved with that, which, we can dig into if you want, but that's basically how I got started with it. And just reaching out to him cold.
Yeah, that's so brilliant. I'm curious. You mentioned you have a day job in a different sort of field. Do you have any experience in this sort of work in the past, or do you have some sort of skill set that was particularly useful in developing this product, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I mean, professionally, no, nothing specific to publishing anything. But I think what I would describe myself as is a generalist, and I like to learn a little bit about a lot of things, and I'm not afraid to try my hand at stuff. And so I'm reasonably confident that if I say I can do something, I can figure out how to do it, even if I haven't really experienced it specifically yet. So, I'm curious and interested, and really that's what led me to do it. And I'm not particularly entrepreneurial in terms of the economic sense, but I'm willing to try new things. So yeah, I work in a completely unrelated industry. I'm confident in my ability to figure things out, which is what happened. So I took all this content and formatted it into a few different, vehicles for a book. Amazon's got the ebook version, and then there's also, they can do a on-demand self-publishing platform for paperback and for hardcover. And so I had to figure out how to get all of that content organized into their, templates to make sure that everything prints correctly. I went and found a freelance graphic designer and commissioned a couple of different cover arts for the book, and got, sent those to Robert and got those approved. Then I just, organized the content. I went through all the transcripts and made it a little bit cleaner to read, broke it up into smaller paragraphs, broke it up into chapters. As I read, I went through and identified potential pull quotes to put at the top of each chapter, just like you would see in, any professional nonfiction book. I also created bullet points of what I consider to be key insights at the end of each chapter and put those together. So everything you see in the book, the content is not mine, but the selections are mine. Yeah. And then just got it all ready to submit and publish and coordinate all the details with Amazon. And then, we also talked about how we were going to market it. So, I drafted a bunch of tweets for Robert to review and modify as necessary. And he just in the last week has started to promote that on Twitter. And hopefully we're going to get a spot on one of his actual podcast episodes, broadcasting the availability of the book. We're trying to drum up some interest in it while it's still in a pre-order stage. So August 21st is when the book actually releases and will be available for purchase. But yeah, I think what it comes down to, if you were to sort of summarize it into, concepts, is that, I was willing to take the initiative to act. I make an effort to communicate clearly and compellingly, especially to a stranger proposing a project that, he doesn't know me from Adam. He's got no trust established. We do now, but of course we didn't initially. Mm-hmm. And then really my goal, the whole thing was just to provide as much value as I could, and to partner with Robert by serving him well. So as many things that I could do that he didn't have to worry about, I took care of. So really that was what I was trying to do.
Yeah, well, you're being modest about the entrepreneurship comment, but modern entrepreneurship is it's a lot of times it's sort of related to like Chamath. Chamath, how he's like, get that money. Entrepreneurship is just about getting the money and then just start to do stupid projects that may or may not work out. But really, like, entrepreneurship is what you're talking about. Like, you literally are a capitalist in the sense that you're using capital in different areas. You're using different people's labors, graphic designers, the Amazon tool, which now makes it very easy to print books, both ebook and physical book. And you're just putting them together. That's what a capitalist is. They put together different capital in different areas, and they produce something new. So that's it, man. That's entrepreneurship. So good on you.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
I didn't realize that Amazon Print on Demand did a hardcover. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, I think it's relatively recent in what they offer, because I hadn't known that until I dove into it. But
I need that. I did pre-order your ebook, but I need the hardcover because some of those books that I've ordered in the past on Amazon, they come out a little flimsy. And so I'm glad that they're doing a hardcover now. That's nice.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The physical copies are not available for pre-order until the actual, like, you basically just make them available and then they show up on Amazon. For whatever reason, they don't let you pre-order physical copies, which doesn't make sense to me, but they only let you do pre-order for the digital version. But it's those little things about the inner workings of Amazon that you learn along the way.
Got it. So let's talk about the Saylor series itself. I did a question on Twitter the other day, which is just something I've been thinking about myself. My question was something to the effect of is the Saylor on Tucker Carlson interview, the appearance that he had on Tucker Carlson, is that the best Bitcoin for boomers explanation? That was my question. Because my suspicion is it's probably the best thing to send a boomer that wants to learn about Bitcoin, at least my dad in particular. And it resulted in a lot of conversation. A lot of people agreed with my comment, but many people said, no, actually it's the Saylor series on Breedlove. So, I mean, this thing, like you mentioned earlier, is sort of blown up and it's become sort of a thing in and of itself. So maybe just to kind of unwind that a little bit, why do you think this podcast series has become so significant and has kind of stood out over other podcast series as like the thing that you should send someone if they want to sort of get sucked into the Bitcoin world?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's representative of, I think, something that's happening in our culture more broadly, which is just the value of long form content where you're not having to compress something into a 30-second soundbite for cable news, but you can really just sit down and spend as much time as you want thinking out loud and going through and unpacking these ideas. It's the Joe Rogan model of podcasting, just applied specifically to Bitcoin. So I think there's a lot of value there in just having so much space for Saylor to just unpack it and for Breedlove to ask him questions. And they really do a deep dive into, they go back to the history of, the Iron Age and the Stone Age and talk about what money was and, what energy was and how it fits into society and culture. And, they take it through the Roman era and then into the modern system of central banking and global markets that are built on fiat currencies. And then they talk about Bitcoin and how that all fits into not just, today, like it's, magic internet money was what people call it, but that actually it's sort of the next progression in evolution in terms of the financial systems and how it can radically change human society when you've got a digital immutable store of value that can't be modified or manipulated by central banks or by governments, or, it can't be confiscated. And, there's all these benefits to it. And so just the fact that he spends so much time teasing out the implications of Bitcoin, and he brings in history and science and anthropology and politics and sociology, energy, economics, even religion. I think that's why it's very valuable.
I agree. And I think what's significant about Michael Saylor too, and there's listeners of the podcast that won't quite understand what is significant about Saylor, even though we're going to play a few clips in a moment that sort of speak for themselves, is that Saylor, he's sort of, I don't know, he sort of represents this sort of newfound legitimacy in Bitcoin in the real world, or you could maybe call it the trad world, the traditional sort of finance and investing world. Before him, of course, you had like the Think Boys, like you had the Breedloves, and some of my favorites like the Pierre Rochards and the Safedeans and the Michael Goldsteins. Some of these like really great thinkers, but they're more kind of coming at it from like an academic point of view. And Saylor can, of course, hang with them 100%, but he's also like a builder in the real world. Like he's been a known tech CEO for decades now. He's been someone that's, we've been talking about since like the .com era. And so when he went all in on Bitcoin, I think that was pretty significant because he was sort of the first, real guy to do that. And he's like what we want Elon Musk to be, but Elon's not yet, right? That's sort of how I think about Saylor.
Yeah. Well, he really put his money where his mouth was. He wasn't just talking about the philosophy of it, but he, took hundreds of millions of dollars in loans so that he could put more Bitcoin on his balance sheet. He calls it his reserve asset for his corporation.
Right. Yeah. He's a billionaire that literally has a majority of his net worth in magic internet money and his own business, which by the way, has a ton of magic internet money on the balance sheet. So he's definitely a skin in the game type of guy. So yeah, I think that's, one of the reasons among many why Saylor is so significant. Okay. So one of the things that I find interesting too is just that that title itself, the title of the Breedlove podcast, What is Money? Is interesting. It's sort of, at face value, it sounds sort of anodyne, but, once you sort of go down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin, you sort of realize that it's actually a pretty significant question. So why do you think that what is money, just that meme or that question is important?
Yeah, well, I think it's because money is one of the most essential components of human society, and it connects to basically everything, not just at the individual level, but even, at the macro level of nation states and global politics and all of that. I mean, monetary policy, even though it feels like nobody really understands it, the layman doesn't understand it. I remember when I was red pilled on, the Federal Reserve and how much of an impact that has on, global living standards and just the ability to fund wars and all of that. That really blew my mind. But, when it comes to war, I think probably most of the wars of the 20th and the 21st century were enabled by central bank policy. And so, if citizens had to pay for the cost of those wars directly, they never would have happened because they would have had to pay for it by taxation. But when you have, central bank policy that allows for printing money, they can pay for it indirectly. And most people don't understand what inflation really is or how they're affected by it. So, monetary policy allows, banks to impoverish the middle classes, to enrich the ruling elites. It generates civil strife and class warfare. It reduces the quality of living for us by, driving money into projects that aren't needed or wanted, or that at least may not be the quote unquote best option for resources that are finite out in the economy. I'm kind of channeling the Austrian economist right now, but I kind of live in that space when I get into put my economics hat on. But I mean, really what it comes down to is I think money is a yardstick that measures value, and you don't want that yardstick to change. Like you wouldn't want the definition of a yard to suddenly go from 3 feet to 7 feet. Like that would just wreak havoc on society. And so that is what a fiat monetary system does all the time and has done for, a couple of hundred years. And so Bitcoin it gives a different answer to what money is or what money can be. And it has all these implications for society that for the in a lot of ways are extremely heartening and good for what can potentially happen in terms of, reducing the power of manipulative elites and the powerful bankers. And, I sound kind of like going down the Alex Jones conspiracy path here, but I'm really not saying anything that isn't obvious to, people who read the news pretty frequently and understand economics and monetary policy. But that's why I think money, the definition of money and understanding that, and then understanding how Bitcoin fits into that is so important. So yeah, it's a deceptively simple question for the name of the show, but there's a lot of depth there that you can mine.
I agree. And I think, you mentioned the Alex Jones thing. This is important because I notice like in my circles, some of my more like conservatively minded friends, they go so dark with that comment that you just made that, it sort of becomes everything's going to collapse. The dollar is going to collapse. And we're going to go back to the barter system. And actually that's preferable because then we're like trading chickens and eggs with our neighbors. And that's a good thing. And I understand that sentiment. Like if you want to get really black-pilled about it, like that's sort of where it goes. But when you really think about what is money, money is actually a really important invention. It's an important invention. It allows us to cooperate with our neighbors because now we have a shared medium of exchange. We have a saleable asset that everyone wants, and it allows us to sort of peacefully cooperate with each other. And I think that's really important. And so I mentioned the sort of black-pilled conservatives, of which I understand that, but also like in the traditional financial planning space, TradFi world, which I also live in, it's sort of just ignored because it's sort of like the idea is, well, cash is trash, so hold a minimum cash position and then just invest the rest and you're good. And that sort of makes sense. Like there's some rationale for that. But if that's as far as you go, you miss the point of just what is money. You never actually ask yourself the question and go down the rabbit hole. And you need to do that.
Yeah, I fully admit to wavering back and forth between the black pill perspective and the white pill perspective, because I do think there is a lot of encouraging things that are happening and that are on the horizon that, hopefully will prevent that sort of black pill future from coming into being.
Well, that's Bitcoin, baby. Yeah, if you're totally black pilled, it's hard to be a Bitcoiner because there has to be a bit of optimism. Like you have to be a little bit optimistic about the ability for this technology to take off.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. So, okay, before we sort of dive into more of the content, one of the things that Saylor is famous for is he's just like a master marketer and he's a master communicator. And he has these things that I call Sailorisms, where he just sort of comes up with these isms. And I thought we could just go through a few of them. And maybe you could just sort of share with me your thoughts on what they are and why they're important. The first one that he talks about a lot, and I believe it's pretty prominent in the Saylor series, maybe it's episode 3, and that's digital energy. What's that all about?
Yeah. So, we have this concept or term called store of value, which is, is applied to usually money, but it can also describe, commodities or really anything that you can exchange and that retains some sort of value over time. And a lot of that is subjective, but really what value is just a reflection of production and a reflection of the energy that went into that production. So, the value of, a cow, if you're going to use that to barter or transact with someone, is, the cow represents all of the time and energy and sunlight and grass and milk that it can produce. And, all of these things rolled up into this entity that we call a cow, and then that can be exchanged for other things of value. And then, of course, as we get more advanced, we can abstract that into other means of exchange, like money or gold or other currencies, et cetera. And so Bitcoin is just the digital version of that. It's a vehicle for capturing or for storing the value that productive energy generates. So, compare that to the dollar. The dollar doesn't really store energy, at least not anymore. It used to, and it should if it's going to operate as a legitimate and currency of integrity. But it doesn't do that anymore. And the reason is because the state just prints money hand over fist and dilutes the pool that's circulating throughout the economy. And, that's what we're feeling right now with all this inflation going on. And it crosses partisan lines. I mean, at the end of Obama's term, the money supply was at all-time highs. And then by the end of Trump's term, it was even higher. And now it's even higher under Biden. So, to me, it's not a left-right thing. It's an elite common person thing. And so Bitcoin is an alternative to the dollar as a store of energy and a store of value. And it's stronger than what the dollar provides because it can't be controlled by the state. It can't be manipulated. It's just code that follows the rules that it's been built with, follows those rules forever. And so, to me, as more and more people recognize that that's what it is and recognize that that it holds value and they choose to store more of their energy inside it, then that actually strengthens it and hardens it against attack. And, Saylor spends a lot of time talking about what that looks like in the real world in terms of how Bitcoin, as it grows in utilization, it just naturally enlists support, from political organizations, corporations, various industries, finance, tech companies, even the energy sector. Both the fossil fuel companies and the quote unquote green energy companies have incentives to utilize Bitcoin, and then therefore, once they're invested in it, to protect it against attack, both attack by nation states, attacks by other political entities, etc. So it really is it's the next version of storing energy, just like all the things that have come behind it in the past. It's just the digital version of it that's sort of been perfected by computer code.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's referring to both like energy in the colloquial sense, like electricity, right? So people make the example of like in Bitcoin mining, you can take stranded electricity, and for the first time in history, there is incentive to create energy in areas where humans don't live, right? Like in rural Iowa or something like that, where we've overproduced green energy, or in like a ghost town in China near a waterfall where they've got hydroelectric energy, but nobody's living there yet, and they sort of overproduce. And so there's now incentive to actually produce energy in places like that where humans aren't at, because you can send it anywhere now with Bitcoin. And I think in the other sense, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what he means is taking like your life's energy in the sense of your life's work. I can work for a month. I can take my month's earnings. I can buy Bitcoin. I can put it in a Bitcoin wallet or a multi-signature vault. And essentially I could take that 1 month's earnings and I could store that energy for 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. And I think he means sort of both those things.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what I meant when I said it's a reflection of the production or the energy that you put into something, is that you can capture that with Bitcoin.
Okay. So he also says digital real estate. I don't know if that's in the Saylor series as well. You would know, but what is digital real estate and why is that important?
Yeah. So, and I think what you're asking about is, he spends some time talking about the ways that Bitcoin can allow you to accomplish your mission or further your legacy, beyond your natural life. And so, in the past, you had to be, they'd be like a Rockefeller family or something in order to create an enormous trust or a foundation, or, buy 1 million acres of land and turn it into a national park, that sort of thing. But with Bitcoin, and a combination of that and smart contracts, you can basically put rules around what your desires are for your wealth or your resources after you're gone. And then you can facilitate what you want. So, he gives an example of, there's a dilapidated park in the middle of Venice, Italy, that is just run down, and nobody has the incentive or the interest to make it beautiful again. And he said, that this is one of my values, is that's the sort of thing that I would like to take and, set money aside to sort of perpetually fund into eternity an entity that would take care of everything required to keep this park up and running, in perpetuity forever. And so, whether it's something like that, whether it's, funding a nonprofit after your death, or, endowing a professorship at your favorite university, or whatever, Bitcoin it gives you digital real estate that you can take to further your legacy with it. Is that what you were thinking of?
Yeah, 100%. And the reason why digital real estate in that sense is a lot more useful than actual real estate is because, and I think he points this out too, is that, over the long run, real estate is not a great store of value for multi-generational families. In fact, you get into this situation where a lot of times multi-generational families lose the farm because they have to sell a bit here and there to do things like pay the taxes, which go up continuously. Laws and regulations change around the ability to own real estate. And so there's a lot of uncertainty around what the future of real estate owning holdings might be.
Yes.
And I think it's a useful meme too. And sort of thinking about just the particular time that we're in right now, this sort of speculative period of Bitcoin where, it's sort of like it's the Wild West and your chance to sort of homestead your 160 acres if you want, right? Before we have like hyper Bitcoinization where it might not be as easy to sort of, get your 6.15 Bitcoin, if you will.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. Okay. So that's pretty helpful. And we're probably going to hear more of the Sailorisms in these clips too. But I wanted to play a couple of clips because I think it points out, like what his sort of style is and what his charisma is all about. And he like does the thing that I'm like always endlessly fascinated, where he uses anecdotes and stories to make his point. And he's got like a vast knowledge of literally every subject too. So we're going to hear that in these clips. And so this is from episode 3 of the Saylor series, titled Technology, Themes Through History, Harder, Faster, and Stronger. Yeah, Seth, is that like a chapter title too, by the way, then?
Yes, it is. All the episodes are the chapter titles.
And this first clip that I'm going to play is on the Wright Brothers. So what he's doing here is he's making the point that grand inventions, they don't happen by brute force. They happen gradually and then suddenly. And oftentimes it's through small and insignificant tinkerers, just sort of putting together the pieces of small inventions that happen along the way.
You remember Google Glass?
Yeah.
How big that was going to be and how that was a lead balloon and how many years is it after Google Glass and it's still not going to happen next year either. Technology fails until it succeeds. That's another trend, another theme. So you see over and over again, people pick a technology and say, it'll never work. It'll never work. It'll never work. In the year 1902, before the Wright brothers flew that next year, if you'd asked the most learned people on earth, they would have given you 100 reasons why airplanes will never fly. Mm-hmm. And they would give you 100 examples of how they didn't fly. And they would talk you to death. And the thing about these paradigm shifts is oftentimes it's not the learned individuals that make the breakthrough. Mm-hmm. Aircraft weren't designed by professors of aeronautics and astronautics and engineering and fluid dynamics and mathematicians. They all failed miserably, right? The Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics. They had a bicycle shop, tinkerers, right? They're the ones that ushered in the age, and they did it against all conventional wisdom. And on the other hand, Leonardo da Vinci tried to develop his own flying contraption. Every brilliant person for hundreds of years tried it, failed. Mm-hmm. All failed. And then some dudes in Dayton, Ohio that have a bicycle shop succeed.
So he's making the point that innovations are incremental and these sort of grand ideas are always doubted by the experts, but then you have small tinkerers, small inventors that gradually along the way sort of create the stepping stones. Seth, why is this significant and how does this sort of relate to the grand themes of the What is Money Saylor series?
Yeah, well, I think Bitcoin's a perfect example of that. It was, mocked and dismissed for quite a while before it all of a sudden, it's not quite mainstream yet, but it's getting there. I remember Jamie Dimon at, I think, JP Morgan has, he mocked it for years saying this is just stupid. And I think some of that was maybe strategic as he was figuring out what he was going to do, behind closed doors. But, all of the mainstream people, and not all, but a lot of the mainstream people in the finance world didn't think it would ever amount to anything, and the people that conceived of it initially and started it, like Bitcoin came out of the underground cypherpunk movement of the 90s, which, they're not exactly on, MSNBC or, whatever the financial network is. So yeah, I think, and the Wright Brothers is a great analogy to, they were outside of the aeronautic, industry to the extent that existed. They weren't, trained scientists. They just figured it out by tinkerers. And that's basically how Bitcoin started as well. And I think that's what we're seeing now with all the layer 2 and the layer 3 technologies that are starting to explode all over the place. A lot of these are going to fail, but they're all generating interesting ideas, and they're all just figuring it out by doing, which is how we see progress in the system. So yeah, I think it's a perfect example of that.
Yeah. And it's why, in my view, Bitcoin sort of stands above the rest in the sort of, the panoply of quote unquote cryptocurrencies, in that when it happened, when Satoshi had that innovation, he was sort of building upon decades and decades of small innovations along the way. And for the first time, it worked. And in my view, none of the other quote unquote cryptocurrencies have had, any sort of 10x improvement on the OG, which is Bitcoin. And, if you think about it too, it's like Satoshi was also just building upon, centuries of human innovation as well too. I remember reading recently even the computer itself, like the first computer was built using vacuum tubes, like vacuum tubes, which was an invention from like the 1700s, right? So that was one of the sort of stepping stones to get to magic internet money that, of course, was invented on a computer. But yeah, well said. The next clip that I want to play is another cool anecdote. And this is an anecdote that he is making about the novel "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress" by Robert Heinlein, which is Saylor says is one of his favorite novels. So here is this clip.
One of my favorite books, I noted, is "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress." And in it, Robert Heinlein, he writes about a bunch of loonies, basically libertarians that live on the moon, that believe in making their own way. And their motto is, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, abbreviated to Tonstoffel. And he introduced that idea. And they take it to the extreme, which is like, your air's not even free on the moon. You pay for everything. You pay for water, you pay for food, you pay for air. Everybody pulls their own weight. No one waits for a bailout. There's no bailout coming from anybody. And they're not big fans of authority, and they don't like being told what to do. And the plot of the book kind of winds on that they're being oppressed by earthlings who are making them work as slaves, and they're taking 90% of their economic productivity and shipping back basically their future to Earth, and they're gradually suffocating and starving them to death. And it's just onerous taxation without representation. So the loonies decide to fight back, with the help of an AI computer. The first AI computer I can remember, the name of the computer is Mike, by the way.
Right.
And their technique is they realize they got a catapult, and they start tossing rocks down the gravity well. And they just take a big rock, put it in their catapult, and it doesn't take that much force to toss it off the moon because they're low G.
Right.
They're tossing the rock out of a 1/8 G or whatever, and it hits the Earth, goes into a trajectory, and of course it starts picking up speed. And by the time it lands, it's like an atomic warhead.
Wow.
They just start tossing them at random places until the Federation Empire that's oppressing them decides that maybe it's had enough.
Wow.
And of course, the lesson is, right, it's humans channeling energy, but they're channeling gravitational energy, and a lot of it. And there's a lot more energy than the stuff that we have. All through human history, since 1 million years ago to today, it's really the story of intelligent people looking around for where is the energy coming from,
right,
and how do I channel it in a network in order to achieve something harder, smarter, faster, stronger.
So Seth, as the fellow Kansas City guy, do you know why I picked that particular clip?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, good. So Robert Heinlein, the author of the novel that Saylor's talking about, is from Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
He's originally a Kansas City, and he's like sort of one of the famous originators of like the sci-fi genre. Mm-hmm. And I've never read I've never read the novel. My understanding of Robert Heinlein is he was like sort of a weird guy, but I have heard good things about that novel. So it is on my list. And what I liked about that clip is just sort of that whole idea of the ethos of there is no free lunch. I think it's just sort of a message that resonates with our sort of nihilistic generation. You know, if you think about like even what you've seen the last couple of years of like small business owners, restaurants getting shut down during the coronavirus. And, you know, a lot of restaurant owners, like it's like their life's dream to own a restaurant or own a bar. And many of those small businesses got shut down in lieu of like the Burger Kings that were built in Westport, right? And I think there's some nihilism there. There's like this malaise that happens when an economy quits being dynamic and you quit being sort of rewarded for your good work and your ingenuity, and the results don't, you know, allow you to get paid in the way that maybe you think you deserve. And so I think that sort of idea of there's no free lunch, it's a great message for that sort of nihilistic generation that sees the situation where you can just sort of stay at home and get paid in stimulus checks if you work on Zoom.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe the corollary to that is that, you know, it's not just that there's no free lunch, but it's that we're going to be made to pay for the lunch of the people that are in charge. And that's what has been so frustrating to me. I'm very angry about what the COVID response, not what COVID has done, but what the government response to COVID has done to our society, both economically and culturally over the last 2 years. That's a whole nother episode's worth of conversation. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that ties back into the financial system that is driving everything right now, and that Bitcoin is a threat to. You know, Bitcoin is a hard money standard, and even with its faults, because it does have some, you know, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and the current system that we have is all driven by fiat, which is driven by, you know, money printed out of thin air, and I don't think people understand how flimsy that system actually is, and that it's actually just held together, you know, by a combination of force of will and manipulation by central banks and propaganda by the media class and the political leadership, and then ultimately the threat of military force. But Bitcoin undermines all of those things because our current system is just debt and smoke and mirrors. And it's not built upon anything that is objective or that is safe from manipulation. And a system that could be built on Bitcoin, it would be all of those things. And you know, we can't rely on our leaders to fix a system because they're invested in it. But that's the great thing about Bitcoin being decentralized is that it allows, you know, quote unquote, little people like us to fight back in little ways and to try to live with more and more, you know, autonomous activity. And, you know, if we can solve for some of the privacy limitations with Bitcoin, I think that it's really going to be key to undermining a lot of the injustices that are occurring at the social level.
Exactly. So, and this is where the 21 million thing is so important too. And it, you know, Bitcoiners talk about this all the time, but it sort of resonates perfectly here, where because there will only be 21 million Bitcoin, there is no ability to print new Bitcoin to create that proverbial free lunch, or in the case of stimulus checks during coronavirus, or student loan payments, or Social Security or Medicare that we won't be able to pay for. These are all things that are versions of the free lunch that we're not paying for actually through things like taxes. We're paying for them through, call it the money printer, or just call it taking on more debt, which in the sort of debt-based economy are one and the same in my view. And on a Bitcoin standard, that's impossible because there will only be 21 million. And so essentially it turns this situation into, well, you have to work for whatever it is that you're going to earn for yourself or provide for your family. And there is no free lunch anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good, Seth. Well, hey, man, I've enjoyed this. I'm excited for the release of the book, and I hope everybody buys the book, and I hope it's a grand success for you and for Breedlove. Yeah, tell us what we need to do. Where do we need to go to buy the book, and where should you send the listeners?
Yeah, so it's up on Amazon right now, and I can give you a link I don't know if you have show notes or anything that you post for your episodes.
We'll put it down there.
Yeah, if you could use that link, that would be great. I can give you my affiliate link, which just means that if you click on it and buy the link, or buy the book, Amazon will throw a few pennies my way. So that's always nice. Mm-hmm. It's helpful for tracking purposes as well. And then we're running a giveaway of 100 copies of the book. One of them physical, and the rest will be digital versions. But I can give you the link for that as well. And you can increase your chances of winning by gaining more entries through doing a handful of things like, following Robert on Twitter or on YouTube, or adding the book to your Goodreads shelf if you're on Goodreads, just things like that. And hopefully you can win a copy.
Well, nice, man. Yeah, that's great. We should do all of those things, and I'll make sure to do that as well, too. And you should come back on the pod again. I've enjoyed this. Thanks, Seth.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Thanks again to Andy for having me on. Now, here is a preface for my special announcement. So there are a variety of ways that you can purchase Bitcoin. Unfortunately, most of the easy methods involve complying with what are called KYC regulations. KYC stands for Know Your Customer. They are ostensibly about anti-money laundering laws, but the reality is that they impose burdens and violations of privacy on the 99% of us who are law-abiding. I'm considering doing an entire episode on all the problems with KYC, but consider just this one. During the Canadian trucker protests in early 2022, many people supported the cause by donating Bitcoin. These well-meaning people did not clearly understand the risks of utilizing cryptocurrencies without the due diligence required to maintain privacy. And as a result, the Canadian government responded with a grievous and unprecedented violation of rights. They froze the crypto wallets and local bank accounts of many people they believed were connected to the truckers, even those who had committed no crimes. That event alone woke many people up to the very real threat that governments pose to our financial privacy and security. But there are ways to legally acquire Bitcoin that is not tied back to your identity. You just have to learn them. Consider this response I hear frequently from quote-unquote normal people who don't share my concerns over privacy in crypto. They'll say something like, "I'm not hiding anything, plus I have to pay a premium to get KYC-free Bitcoin." And while that's true that you do pay slightly more for non-KYC Bitcoin, that's not how I look at it. What's really happening is that you are using your private data to subsidize your purchases on Coinbase, which is the most popular and mainstream crypto marketplace. Trust me, you will likely regret it later. Pure, anonymous, untainted, and private Bitcoin is worth paying for. And that is what I can now offer to my friends and family. I've recently completed the onboarding process to become a vendor with Azteco, a company which sells and generates vouchers that can be redeemed for Bitcoin. You know how every Walmart has a spinning display of gift cards for sale? Applebee's, iTunes, the local movie theater, etc. This is just like that, but for Bitcoin. Let's say that you want to buy $50 of Bitcoin privately and anonymously. You would reach out to me, we'll agree on a payment method, you send me the $50, and I will generate a QR code that you can scan on your phone. Within seconds, you'll have Bitcoin deposited in your own crypto wallet. I can even refer you to a wallet app that doesn't require a username or an email address or any other personal info. I've researched how to buy Bitcoin privately for months and months, just chasing what interests me. This method of Bitcoin vouchers is the simplest, fastest, safest, and just coolest method of doing it. It's perfect for friends and family who want to dip their toe into the future of finance with very little effort and complete privacy. So, if you want to buy a Bitcoin voucher, there are a variety of ways you can reach me. If you already know me personally, just send me a text message or via social media. Otherwise, you can email me at seth@closemindedpodcast.com or DM me on Twitter @closemindedpod. I'll also set up an intake form at closemindedpodcast.com/Bitcoin. Those links will be available on the show notes page at closemindedpodcast.com/19. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a rating and review in iTunes or whatever podcast app you use. See you next time.